asthma, right? And they're suffering because somebody is polluting the air, then you as a common person ought to have access. And you shouldn't need to pay thousands of dollars to a lawyer, right? It should be a lot easier than that. And so perhaps Stone would insist that courts be funded, and that, for example, public defenders and guardians for ecological holes be compensated somehow. Anyway, which would, of course, require us to get together as a country, decide whether or not that's how we want to go, that's how we want to spend our money, to pay for people to watch out. It's probably a good idea. I don't know. Is anyone opposed to the idea of appointing a guardian for our climate system and allowing that guardian to seek, to file petitions? Yes?
I'm curious to know how that would work if corporations are also considered people and have the right to exist, and this would potentially require the dissolution of...
The thing about that observation, and Stone mentions that, corporations have legal standing, and that just lowers the threshold so far that, Stone points out that it's really a lot easier. Courts are pressed into service to make decisions for shareholders all the time, right? And so courts have to make decisions about what's happening with that company. And sometimes, it's squishy, right? And critics of Stone's proposal want to say, well, how on earth is a guardian going to... Well, let's get to it. Go back to your question again, though. Let me make sure I...
Yeah, I'm just wondering, so if corporations are considered people and they have, basic rights...
Yeah.
And and you're compensating for, for example, ExxonMobil would require total liquidation. How does that going to play out?
They don't have, that's a fiction, of course. That's a very recent, ridiculous decision, a series of ridiculous decisions that have no precedent, that are issued by an activist court, a right-wing corporate activist court, that has opened the floodgates to the corruption of our political system by giant transnational money, right?
So essentially, we would have to get rid of...
So screw the damn corporate. They don't have legal stand. Communities have always come before corporations. That's just the history of our legal system. Communities have always been empowered to dissolve corporations. Come on, right? It's only through 40 years of right-wing corporate propaganda that people have come to accept the proposal that somehow corporations are kings, can do whatever the hell they want, and can just come in here and steal all our stuff. 100 years ago, we wouldn't have put up with any of this. We said, that's enough of that. You're done. We're taking your charter. So, it's really kind of unfair. Money is not speech, right? It just isn't. That's just a fact. So, any judge who starts his opinion saying that money is speech, he's clearly just way out in left field. He's some radical extremist who's working on behalf of some giant transnational corporation, and he's a mole put into our government in order to undermine it from inside, which is what's been happening for the last 40 or 50 years, and it's just disgusting, quite honestly. But today's our day to be political, okay? I try to be provocative, and you guys are all, what the hell? What do I need to do? Come in here and just go crazy? Go completely nuts? Just start screaming and shouting and ranting and raving? Denouncing the federal government, the damn corporations that are polluting everything and destroying our resources? Is that what I have to do? Do you care? Yes, of course you care. Some of you are too busy. Some of you are too busy and just don't have enough time to do this work. This is meditative work. This is not, how do I get from A to B? Almost all of your other classes, except humanities classes. Literature, English, poetry, that stuff. But the engineering, the science, the social science, all that stuff teaches you how to get from A to B, right? It's instrumental thinking. It's cause and effect, consequentialist thinking, and philosophy is not like that. Philosophy is meditative thinking, and you need time for it. Anyway, Mr. Eastwood.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot your first name for a second.
James.
James, sorry.
So it's talking about the whole role of guardians and whatnot. Isn't that still really exploitable by either side? So you'd have very left-wing people sponsoring every single tree and ecological hole.
But you can't politicize a trial.
Right.
You can't politicize a trial. Yes, of course.
But you can also have right-wing people that...
The ExxonMobil's attorneys are going to be billionaires. He's going to have the dream team, right? He's going to have... You thought O.J. Simpson had a good representative? Come on, man. These guys are going to have the very best, right? Of course. And they're going to have to bring in their evidence, though.
Right.
And judges do this all the time. Judges are finders of fact. or a jury trial if it's in front of a jury. They are the finders of fact. They hear all the evidence. It probably take weeks, months. Some of these trials go on for months. You know, just dozens and dozens of expert witnesses.
And isn't that eventually going to fill up the court
But there's going to
system?
be a finding of fact, you know, and the judge has to follow, you know, science, secular law. He can't just go on, he can't just pull stuff out of thin air, right? And
Right.
so, no,
But then
we're
we're
on
also
pretty
going
firm
to get
ground
like
here.
right-wing people in there that are going to just start like, oh, I'm taking care of this ecological hole.
That's
and
true.
They're going to be like, oh, well, this isn't going to be too damaging if they put so-and-so in there, and then it's
But,
all
but
opinion.
one thing that Christopher Stone points out is that it's a lot, I think one thing he believes, if he doesn't point it out directly, is that it's a lot harder to corrupt a trial court than it is to corrupt an agency of the federal government or an agency of the state government. The Bureau of Reclamation, you know, all these agencies, man, the Forest Service, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Army Corps of Engineers, they have been captured by resource extractive transnational corporations, right? And they've been corrupted, right? The Bureau of Wreck the Nation, right? Why do you suppose they wreck the nation? Because they're paid to do that. I mean, the Iron Triangle, right? The administrators who run the agencies, the corrupt congressmen in Washington, D.C., and then the extractive industry, right? The extractive industry pays a little bit of money to the corrupt congressmen in D.C. who make sure that the agency, or the president, you know, the president, of course, is the guy that directs the agency, but they're all revolving door, right? There's probably a timber executive in the Forest Service calling all the shots. And that's, you know, that's corruption. That's real corruption that's happening right now. And I think Stone has confidence, and I do too, quite honestly, that it's much harder to corrupt a trial court. For, you know, and these are public trials. Our legal system is open to the public, you know. And you can bet when that guardian, you know, files his case and is heard in court, obviously it's going to be packed. And
But now we're talking about having like thousands and thousands and thousands of court cases.
yeah,
And
probably
do we have the time for that, especially if they take months? Then you're going to have dissenting opinions and it's going to take longer.
what's going on right now too. He thinks actually this would expedite everything. It would shorten everything up. Because right now, instead of having property owners duking it out with ExxonMobil or whoever the polluter is, you have the ecological whole duking it out. So it's a lot less complicated. And then the fund that gets established to make Earth's climate systems whole again also goes to compensate individuals. For example, kids with asthma who have been harmed, to a greater extent, get more money, et cetera, right? All right. But I would submit that something like this is going to happen at some point out of practice. And then really philosophically, the question is why? Why is it, or why should it happen? Why? Probably it's going to end up happening just for human reasons. Probably it's going to end up happening because we find it to be a much more efficient. Our society is going to eventually discover that it's a much more efficient way of managing our natural resources. To just acknowledge that they have legal and moral status in their own right, and then to manage them. Obviously, there are going to be some very difficult balancing acts. I'm not deceived or deluded about that at all. It's going to be very difficult in some instances, and there are going to be some tough decisions that judges ultimately are going to have to make. But anyway, let's try to move on and see exactly. We'll take our break in about 6 or 7 minutes here. So note that under an anthropocentric environmental ethic, or an anthropocentric tradition of resource management, like Pinchoian conservationism or Group A conservationism, to the extent that Pinchoian conservationism promotes protection of non-human natural entities, it does so always and only for human benefit. Okay, so that just kind of goes without saying that the notion that they have legal if they do have legal standing, it would only be for conservationists, it would only be because of human benefit. But Stone he wants to argue more than that. He wants to argue just like Leopold wants to argue more, right? Leopold throws these tantalizing hints about the biotic rights of wolf packs, right? And so too does Christopher Stone, here and there. And I'll point those out to you. So how would trees have standing? Here are some of the other legal operational aspects. Stone argues that if we are to build a legal system that respects and protects non-human natural entities as bearers of legal rights, this system must provide for court appointment of legal guardians, okay, etc. All right, that's specifically what needs to happen. And the analogy with guardians for incompetent persons is one that Stone makes. And he says this guardianship system could be established either by a U.S. Supreme Court ruling or by special congressional action, of course by constitutional amendment, which would be the hardest problem. Recognizing legal standing in non-human natural entities would be more satisfactory from the point of view of conservationist groups than the liberalized standing requirement accepted by some courts. Liberalized standing is what the Sierra Club, that's all they were asking for. But Stone, of course, is arguing that and that's what Justice Douglas picked up on, right? Who agrees with Stone, that we ought to go all the way and go beyond liberalized standing and just provide for standing in ecological wholes themselves, all right? In this kind of system, I often think, well, maybe the Vatican ought to hire Christopher Stone, or somebody who, really understands what Stone was trying to do, right? I mean, Pope Francis, this is, if Pope Francis thought of a reformed legal system, this is what he would come up with. I guarantee it. It fits together. So somebody go make a name for yourself. Go get hired by the Vatican and start, getting on it. Changing of the world's legal systems to it's such a simple and elegant change, isn't it? It would require a great deal more, a much greatly expanded legal system, civil court system. So that would be hard, but the change itself is so elegant and simple, isn't it? Anyway, guardianship would provide the endangered natural entity with continuous supervision over a period of time with a consequent deeper understanding of a broad range of the ward's problems, not just the problems present in one particular piece of litigation. All right? So not only would the guardian have a much better perspective because the guardian's local, and the guardian is someone who knows, right, and can argue eloquently about the needs of the biotic whole, of the ecological whole, right? But not only that, the guardian's going to do a better job than some bureaucrat in a state government or in the federal government. Okay. Anyway, so there's our Mineral King Valley again, and that means this may be a bit of a break. Let's try to get through these objections too, and then we'll take our break in 4 minutes. All right. So Stone, fair, like any good author, any good philosopher, will anticipate objections. He anticipates 2 potential objections that have already kind of come up a little bit. I think maybe that's what James was, one of these objections, it sort of reminds me of what James was saying, the second objection here. But the first objection is the kind of objection that we can remember William Baxter's essay to help us out with. Okay? Remember Baxter. The word nature has no normative connotation. There is no normative model of natural or healthy nature. Okay? Moving up a little bit, the very concept of the needs of a forest, river, ocean, or climate system can only be used in a metaphorical way. Okay? And that means, going up one more, a guardian could not judge the needs of the forest, river, ocean, or climate system in its choice. It's just not possible, because there's no normative nature, right? So some of you might have formed an opinion about, or reached on. I certainly have, and I would agree with Stone. Stone just says Baxter's way off the track. That's just not correct. That's just not correct. If you understand ecology and biology, then you can identify whether or not an ecological whole is healthy. It's not that hard. And he points out too, actually this is where he draws the comparison with what courts routinely do when they intervene, when they're asked to intervene in corporate, in internal corporate affairs, right, by a shareholder, for example. The guardian attorney for a smog endangered stand of pines could venture with more confidence that his client wants the smog stopped than the directors of a corporation can assert that the corporation wants dividends declared. We make decisions on behalf of and in the purported interests of others every day. These others are often creatures whose wants are far less verifiable and even more metaphysical in conception than the wants of rivers, trees, and land. All right? Take that, William Baxter. That's what he's saying, right? Remember Baxter's making fun of Henry David Thoreau, each person is entitled to his own private Walden, but you can't just say it's for everybody, right? And I don't really care about the penguins, you know, maybe those hippies over there, they care about them. But there is no normative nature, right? It's only what humans want, Baxter says. Stone just says, no, man. We know that the penguin population is healthy when it has these conditions. And we know that these other conditions make the penguin population unhealthy, right? So, I mean, you might not care about the penguin population, but that's a whole other argument. A guardianship system will not be much different than from what we have now. Okay, that's the other objection. All right? Right now, we already have guardians, right? Come on, man. We've got the U.S. Department of Interior. You know those Smokey Bear hats? Don't they watch out for the interests of the ecological goals already? Right? Well, Stone observes what I've observed, what I could just go on and on and on forever about because it upsets me, is that federal agencies, but that doesn't upset me that much, don't worry. I'm a happy guy. I'm not a sarcastic, angry man. I used to be, probably, more angry. I've always been kind of mellow. Anyway, Stone observes that federal agencies are only guardians of federal public lands, not guardians of state-owned or county. So, in other words, well, you know, they have their own agencies, though. States and counties, you know, have their own. But, and here's the problem, though, for Stone, and this is my problem, too. Federal agencies have several competing goals to pursue, only one of which is protection of natural entities. All right? The Forest Service, we know, is entrusted to satisfy timber companies, not just to protect forests. So they want to talk about multiple use, right? But if one of those so-called multiple uses is industrial scale logging on U.S. Forest Service land, then, sorry, you know, that's not really multiple use, because that's not consistent with those other supposed uses that you're managing for. And that's what's going on with our federal forests, right? They've just been cut to the bone to satisfy timber companies. So, you know, you can't appeal to the guardians in the Forest Service because they're not doing their job, right? They're undermining. Those are the foxes guarding the hen house. What we really we need something more accountable, something more honest, something more local, something that's transparent. It's easy to buy off the federal government, right? It's a lot harder to buy off thousands of local courts. The drawbacks of our current system and the advantages of a guardianship system are especially evident in an era such as ours when government agencies have been thoroughly captured by resource extractivist industries. Stone argues that non-human and natural entities need outside guardians who are not corrupted by industry-dominated government agencies. Outside guardians will be more objective, more reliant on science than government bureaucrats. Okay? Again, kind of another, you know, libertarians are going to say, right on, man. We want to try to be objective here. And it's not objective to allow giant companies to externalize their costs and don't make us pay for it, right? Make them pay for it. That's more objective. And let's just rely on science. Anyway. All right, so let's take our break, and then we'll get back into this, okay? It's getting very exciting. So come back at 1 minute after 1. I did get it this morning.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So,
Are you sad?
Yeah. Basically, when you said to explain the wise uses, I actually did it here. So by taking into account wise uses, I learned.
Can you talk about this after?
After.
Yeah,
Okay.
or during my office hours. I'll mention that. I should have mentioned that. I actually didn't think people were going to pick them up before class, but I said not there. People started thinking. Anyway, but yeah, if you want to talk about this, just talk to me after class or something
Let's
outside
have
class.
another class and have an exam and stuff.
Okay. How about at 4 or 4:30?
4:30. In
Okay.
your office?
Yeah.
I'll
See you then.
Did you bring in the sign-up sheet from that last class?
Oh, that reminds me. Yes, this was the last class before.
Okay.
And we'll get this going around momentarily.
You don't have to have a copy.
Are we talking about Tuesday?
Did you need that one too?
I'm going to send that around down here. I'm just going to mark everyone present on Tuesday, actually, because I don't want to have to worry about people who aren't here today. You know.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
don't like to take up class time, you know, much talking about people's individual essays. Okay. So, if people have concerns, I'm very open to reconsidering my grade that I gave you on your midterm. But we need to do that outside of class.
That last slide, isn't it the other way around with the Department of Interior and Agriculture?
The Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture.
Not the Department of Interior.
Well, I just threw those out as two different examples. You know, I mean, the agencies,
Okay.
those are two cabinet branches, right?
But not an example, okay.
And they each have several agencies under them, right? The Department of Interior has
BLM, National Forest.
BLM, exactly. And then the agriculture, I believe,
It's really just the forest.
you know what's interesting too is that NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is under the Commerce Department. And NOAA is responsible for putting together recovery plans for marine species listed under the Endangered Species Act. So NOAA, under the Department of Commerce, is in charge of salmon recovery in the Columbia. Isn't that interesting?
What is the USGS under?
U.S. Geological Survey is under the Interior. Yeah. That makes sense. That's where they belong. You know, that's old John Wesley Powell's baby. You know. He would be very disturbed if they moved it. Of course, they named a big giant reservoir after him. You know, that destroyed one of his favorite places too. So I guess, you know.
Yeah, how come we can't just talk about the fun stuff, just Edward Abbey and...
Those are the radical enviros. We still
Yeah.
don't know what do they mean either. Do we? We'll get into some deep ecology.
Okay.
We get into some fun stuff. The whole class is fun, isn't it? It's pretty darn fun. Yeah, you know, we're doing this meta-ethical stuff, and it's a little bit tedious. But today's not tedious. Today should be really, really exciting. I mean, today is one of those days where you just have all these lights go off in your head, and you think, my God, you know, this is actually not that bizarre to think about, and it wouldn't take that much to do this. And maybe an enlightened society is obligated.
How do you apply to third world countries and whatnot? Not to mention you're going to start warring with Russia and whatnot. What
Well,
is it
Nancy,
about them?
Now those are prudential concerns, James, though. And of
Yeah.
course those are important, prudential concerns, but remember, I keep saying this, what Kant said about utilitarianism, and this is what he means. Woe to those who creep through the serpent windings of utilitarianism. Because if all you do is go around saying that we can't do this, we can't follow these normative guidelines because we are trapped in a catastrophic economic system, and it would be imprudent to adopt these other normative guidelines. It would just be imprudent, even though we know that that's consistent with the the kind of harmonious relationship that we need to cultivate. Scientifically, we understand we need to cultivate that, and yet to say that we're not going to do that just because it's imprudent or it's economically not feasible, it's not quote-unquote realistic, and I'm the grown-up in the room, right? And I'm realistic, I'm sober-minded, right? And us sober-minded people, well, we recognize that the world is going to continue, for example, to consume large quantities of fracked oil and fracked natural gas, right?
Right.
That's just a fact, baby, right? So let's be grown-ups here and just acknowledge that we need the Tesoro Savage oil terminal at the port of Vancouver, right? Woe to those who creep through the serpent windings of utilitarianism. Next thing you know, you're justifying on the basis of some prudential appeal to what we just have to do, the total obliteration of the biosphere, right? Because it's what we have to do. Because the nomos prevails, right? Economy, nomos, the rules of the home. We've studied the home, and we discovered that those rules of the home are inconsistent with the ongoing livability of the home. So we got to change the rules. And we can't do that if we bow down to them all the time and say that, well, that's just the way it is. Yeah, you know, I mean, we're up here in the ivory tower, and a lot of this stuff is just not practically feasible. Yes?
Well, you said, like, what about Russia, and what about China, and these other polluters? Like, what if our national identity was to shift slightly, and that we would actually use those as sort of motivation in order to make such changes, and then, like, let it play out? Oh, the science and all the other things about whether it's sustainable and these other things. Like, if national identity, and like, a lot of times you can, I took a history class on environmental history, and it really ticked me off because I wanted to talk about the philosophy of what was going on in these environments, but the creation of national parks was like, the only paper that you could write for the course was how the history is about people fighting other people over the land and how other people use the land. If we could basically simplify that argument, like, and for most people, if it's national identity, if it's us versus them, not us versus the environment, like, or us and our relationship to the environment, it's a lot simpler. It's a little more elegant for most people to understand that can relate to that.
Yeah. I don't know. We're gonna broach again this question about whether anthropocentric arguments appeal to are stronger and sturdier, and than these exotic more than anthropocentric ones. Stone is making both. He's making more than anthropocentric arguments, and he's making them both. You'll see. Okay. All right. So we finished this. All right. So this is his normative argument to the best of my ability to reconstruct it. He gives us what is essentially a pragmatist argument. And it's really not just a pragmatist argument. I hesitated to identify it that. It's an argument about fairness, really, ultimately, in favor of reforming our legal system to recognize legal rights in non-human natural entities. All right, I note that his pragmatist leanings, he actually kind of comes out as a pragmatist. I mean, philosophically, you know, American philosophy pragmatist. In some of his later writings, you know, as he gets schooled up on environmental ethics, he kind of starts gravitating towards pragmatism. But here's his normative claim. Every well-working legal economic system should be structured as to confront each of us with the full costs. Okay? It's a fairness argument. Should be so constructed as to confront each of us with the full costs that our activities are imposing on society. And he uses the example of a paper mill. Ideally, a paper mill ought to be forced to take into account not only the goods that it uses to make the paper, right? The lumber, the acid, the labor, etc. That its production takes from other use, but also what costs alternative productions. Actually, I should have changed this. Anyway, what he means to say is that the paper mill should be responsible not only for paying the cost of what it takes to build its product, right? But also the cost to society of imposing pollution, right? Of emitting pollution into the air or into the waterways, okay? The legal system, through the law of contracts and the criminal law, this is just kind of a no-brainer point, right? The mill owner has to pay, right, by law. Otherwise he's going to get arrested and get in big trouble, right? He can't just steal the lumber, he can't steal the acid, and he can't hire slaves either, right? That's illegal, right? So the legal system makes the mill owner confront the cost of the first group of demands, right? For just the stuff that he needs to make his product, right? However, unfortunately, so far as pollution costs are concerned, traditional legal institutions have a more difficult time catching and confronting us with the full cost of our activities. And he says this is just wrong. It's also, of course, wrong to be doing anything other than paying attention to the lecture in class, but sometimes I feel. Anyway, this is just wrong, right? He says that's unfair. If you're doing something, it's just unfair for you to be throwing off the cost of what you're doing onto innocent third parties who don't want anything to do with it, who are not benefiting from what you're doing at all, right? Don't want you to do what you're doing. That's just a fairness argument, right? And yet, it happens all the time. It's amazing how much damage has been done to our planet in the name of digging stuff up and making profits, right? Go to, is it Butte, Montana? The whole downtown is this giant pit where this mine, and they left it, right? And it's just toxic junk all over the place, right? And that's just one small example, right? The people who profited from that mine got away with millions and millions and millions of dollars into their private bank accounts, and the public is left. And this happens, right? It's just the story of the last 200 years of unregulated or under-regulated capitalism. And what Stone is saying is that we need to re-regulate capitalism, but we need to do it at this deep, fundamental level, right? Not through federal government or state government interference in the marketplace, but by creating a legal system that obligates polluters to pay the full cost of the pollution that they cause, okay? Stone points out that many human interests that are damaged by pollution are too fragmented and too remote causally to warrant securing representation pressing for recovery, right? You get cancer, you know, Rachel Carson died of breast cancer, and while she was still, anyway, you know, but she couldn't prove, right? I mean, you can't, right? I mean, the cause of your cancer, you know, I mean, I don't know enough about this stuff, but it didn't used to be very much cancer at all. In fact, Rachel Carson wrote about that in her book, in Silent Spring. She dedicated, a whole chapter was all about the escalating rates of cancer as a result of all these chemicals that we're exposed to. Anyway, but what are you going to do, right? When you get cancer, who are you going to sue, right? I mean, and how are you going to prove that it was this company, right? It's so hard to prove. The causal chain is so remote, right? That it's very difficult to recover any damages from a company. But if that company is sued for damaging the atmosphere, maybe the damage that company did to the atmosphere is the cause of, what, 2 billion deaths in the last 100 years or so. But that's impossible to prove, right? That's impossible to prove. But we can prove that the climate system is disintegrated and destabilized, okay? We can prove that. So, Stone thinks that his guardianship system, making ecological wholes such as the climate system, or such as Mineral King, or such as a forest, such as a salmon run, such as a salmon ecosystem, making those ecological wholes, the plaintiffs, right? That's what we're talking about. They're going to be the plaintiffs, right? That's what you are when you file a tort claim. You're the plaintiff. Right? So it's going to be, the plaintiff is going to be Earth's climate systems, right? And then the defendant, right? The defendant is going to be ExxonMobil or Texaco or any of these other filthy businesses that we all depend on. Isn't that something?